My grandfather was an Englishman and he was in trouble with the law quite a bit before he came to Australia. I have notes in my great-grandfather's diary which tells about him being imprisoned several times. He was released from jail in 1913 for the last time, and he went and joined the Merchant Navy as an assistant cook. He ended up in Australia in November of 1913, and then when war broke out he went and he enlisted in Melbourne and joined the 3rd Light Horse.
So, Joe, do you know if he could ride a horse before he joined up?
I don't know, to be honest. Yeah, I'm not too sure about that part.
He was a Londoner, wasn't he?
Yes, he was, yeah, so I don't know how many horses there were in London. But he did keep a diary when he was fighting at Gallipoli. And in 1929, my grandfather typed out, made a transcript of the diary. These are the original 1929 documents. And
the diary's been lost, has it?
I don't know who has the diary now. I would imagine it must still be with our English cousins.
Yeah.
So I don't know who it was passed on to, but fortunately we got the transcripts, which
fantastic.
Which is great. So. He records on the 18th of May 1915, sailing in north direction past transport Z22, gave us news of the death of General Bridges at 5 a.m. this morning. So that was a piece of history, Gallipoli history.
So as he was sailing in, he learnt of the death of...
Yes, a passing ship informed them that he died I think he'd been injured a couple of days beforehand. Alf wrote about his everyday life in the trenches. Interesting seeing how they became so accustomed to the violence and the shooting. And one entry he has where he says nothing important happened today except a bugler got blown to bits. So it was like it was a everyday thing. So it's I'm sure the bugler and his family thought it was important, but to him it was just an everyday thing. Another thing, talking about lots of shrapnel on the beach, about a dozen hits, many narrow escapes, and the way he says bathing greatly interfered with, and then snipers have a good go at the bathers at the foot of Walker's Ridge. So they just saw it as an inconvenience that they were trying to bathe and they were being shot at. A ship had come into Port Said, and because he'd been with the Merchant Navy before the war, he realised a few of his old buddies were on board, so he went on board and they undertook a marathon drinking session, and my grandfather got drunk and fell asleep. When he woke up, the ship had actually taken off to sea with him on board. Once the captain of the ship became aware, they weren't able to turn back because they were taking cargo to Egypt. My grandfather was put to work as an assistant cook. He wasn't unduly worried because the captain had told him that they were going to drop cargo off in Egypt and then return, but instead they ended up in Canada, and which is a far cry. So it was actually 9 months before my grandfather was able to return again. But he worked the whole time that he was on the ship. Eventually the ship went back to London, and he went and he presented himself to the AIF headquarters in London, and he was placed under arrest for desertion, and placed in jail. In Britain, it was taken very seriously, and it was a serious crime. He was in jail for 2 months, and because it was taking such a long time to get the case against him together, he decided that the Light Horse Brigade would treat him much more leniently than in London. So in a later letter, he wrote that he broke arrest. He said, "I broke arrest by devious ways," which I'm not sure what devious ways were, but somehow he broke arrest and escaped prison. Well, he did take himself off to the Light Horse unit in Egypt, so he took himself back there, presented himself in full uniform to the Light Horse and handed himself in there. He was sentenced by them to 12 months hard labour, but because he'd been of good character and good behaviour in regards to fighting against the enemy beforehand, that they reduced that to 6 months hard labour instead. He obviously went back to fighting because in 1918 he was actually awarded the military medal for bravery in the field. So all of a sudden he's gone from about to be court-martialed to receiving one of the highest medals that he could have received. The citation says that the action for which he was recommended at Yenin on 20th of the 9th, 18, Corporal Goldthorpe was employed as motorcycle dispatch rider between Advance Regiment and British headquarters. During the advance on this place, the enemy was still holding out in town. Nevertheless, he succeeded in bringing back dispatches from the Advance Regiment. Throughout the advance of the brigade on Damascus, he has been used as a dispatch rider between advance guards and reconnaissance squadrons and has never failed to bring back dispatches. He was the only motorcyclist able to keep ahead of the brigade. He must have had pretty good motorcycle riding skills, yes, yeah. So that was...
So better than his horse skills.
I was going to say, considering it was a light horse and he got the award for motorbike riding instead, which is quite ironic.
He was a bit of a lad, a bit of a rogue, wasn't he?
He was, yes. As the great-grandfather's diary show, he was in and out of prison and very naughty in the early years, and which probably accounted for his ability to escape prison in Egypt and in London, I should say. And yes, so he obviously had good escapee skills. So. He was never in trouble again in Australia, and married my grandmother, who came from a very respectable family, and didn't play up again. For a man who was going to be court-martialed for desertion at Gallipoli, he actually joined the army again in the Second World War and re-enlisted. He actually wrote to the authorities. I have a letter here written from Malvern in Melbourne, and that's July 1932. He explains the circumstances of his absence from 14th of Feb 1916 until the 9th of December 1916. So he was 9 months he went missing. He said that when I decided to visit the Pantani at Port Said, there was absolutely no thought in my mind of desertion from the service. Had I desired this, I could easily have accomplished it at the various ports of sale of the Pantani, particularly in Canada. But as the ship was engaged on transport work, I was doing my bit towards a successful conclusion of the war. I trust, therefore, that the above explanation will be satisfactory to you and that my transport service may be considered work of a military character. So it's,
And what happened then?
I don't know what the outcome was of that. I'm assuming that it was taken into account as active service still.
Yeah.
So, as I said, because he joined the army again in the Second World War, and by that time he was a sergeant. Pieces, my father, being Alf's only son, had a lot of things passed down to him, like grandfather's. That's his military medal for their bravery in the field, and because Dad was his only son, they were passed down to him. And then my father died 20 or so years ago, and I was the only one in the family really with a sense of family history and genealogy, so I inherited what was still in the family. So it's
And it brought you to this museum too.
It did, yes. I came here to share my grandfather's story with the museum, and then all of a sudden I was a volunteer all in one afternoon.
That's right.
So I became a volunteer, and I've been here probably about a year or so now. So I just love history, and so it's really the whole museum interested me. So it's all the various stories. Yeah, I think I'd just like more people to know about the history of the Light Horse, and I think it's important, even with the veterans now, and recording, while some of them are still alive, recording their life stories and keeping the story alive. As I said, I would never have known about my grandfather's diaries had it not been for my great-grandfather having the foresight to type them up and keep them as a historical record. So I thought that was quite forward thinking.